when you're in a small startup, you're in a speedboat. When you're in a speedboat, you move the wheel, the speedboat moves really fast. The bigger the boat gets, you move the wheel, it takes a lot longer to see the impact of the turn. So every time you change strategy or you bring in a new process or you start refining those processes, it's going to take longer to see the impact.
ברוכים הבאים לפודקאסט של Storemaven, סטארט-אפ Fuckups. אנחנו נארח כאן את המוחות המבריקים ביותר בסצנת ההייטק הישראלית, ונדבר דווקא על הצדדים הפחות נעימים של הדרך המקצועית שלהם. איזה כישלונות הם חוו בדרך, איך הם עזרו להם ללמוד, וגם כמה טיפים למאזינים. כישלונות בונים את הסיפור של כולנו, אז מעולה שאתם איתנו. בואו נתחיל.
Hey, thank you everybody for joining us today. This is Startup Fuckups, a podcast by Storemaven. We have here today with us Avi Wiesenberg, an executive sales leader in B2B SaaS. He's one of the greatest people I know in sales here in the Israeli scene and in the world and in the universe.
In the universe. Well. Fantastic to be here, Fishy. Thank you for inviting me. Excited to share our mess ups together and discover how we can still fuck up and still be awesome.
Awesome. So, Avi, what was your first job in the world and how did you get here? How did you get here?
How did I get here? How did I get into being? I think that's a discussion for a different podcast. But how did I end up in Israel is partly by design, I think. I mean, I always wanted to get to Israel, grew up, Zionist and wanted to be here. Married an American who had no intention of living in the UK. So about 11, 12 years ago, we packed up and moved to Israel. But I think by design, I knew I wanted to come already to Israel when I was around 18 or 20 and got into the world of technology because of that. Like I knew I needed to get into technology in order to be here. And sales kind of was a natural flow for me based on, my family's background. My dad was... I think he'd like to call himself an entrepreneur. I think he was a little bit more of kind of a wheeler-dealer type character. He sold textiles in the East End of London. My first jobs were, schlepping fabric out of the lorries and into the warehouse. But then I got my first break in technology through Oracle and actually moved out to Dublin in Ireland to start my sales career.
So what did you do in Oracle?
So I was in inside sales, which in those days was supporting the field reps. I had 5 field reps that I was supporting over the phone from Dublin, and then slowly was promoted through the ranks at Oracle. I wouldn't say slowly, actually, it was pretty fast, but that's me and my ego saying that. And eventually was working in the city of London, selling database to some of the biggest banks in the world.
So inside sales back then, what year was it, by the way?
You're challenging me now, but it was about 2002, 2003, something like that.
Oh, cool. So inside sales back then wasn't actually selling on Zoom.
It wasn't selling on Zoom. We did have a WebEx account at the time, but it wasn't primarily selling over Zoom. Inside sales there, it was still sitting in an office, but you were supporting the field reps that were selling. And then we had kind of a hybrid role, which is probably more to the way that we understand inside sales today, where I would every now and then get on a plane and go back to the UK and see my accounts when I started selling to higher education.
Awesome. Did you enjoy it?
Dublin was amazing. It was a great experience, a phenomenal place to learn sales. Oracle was a brilliant place to learn sales. I look back very fondly still at my time in Oracle. Awesome.
So as a salesperson, what gets you up in the morning? What are you excited about other than money?
So it's a difficult one to detach in the world of sales. I think that, there's a fascinating debate around commission and the coin-operated salespeople and whether that's something which has become less fashionable in today's world. But money is always a motivator. But for me, to be honest, technology sales for me, I think, was a great fit and something which I'm still quite passionate about because I'm excited about the power of technology and its impact in terms of changing the world and changing business. And I think more and more that line has become blurred between technology and business. It used to be, the role and the remit of the CIO in the business was to bring technology into the business. More and more today, the business itself has to adopt technology in the most efficient way in order to survive. And more technology and the line between technology and business and efficiency and the way that the business runs has become more and more blurred as everyone has an understanding and an adaptation of how technology should work, how those processes should work in terms of driving the business forward. And I think that's really the evolution that we're seeing, and something which motivates me and excites me.
Cool. So you see salespeople as evangelists almost of technology.
I think our role has evolved from being, technology salespeople to more and more how I learned how to do it at the outset at Oracle, which is a business transformation, right? When you're selling deep technology that is going to impact the business, you're a business consultant that happens to understand the technologies that you're selling, in essence.
Amazing. Yeah, we talked a lot about it over the years, consultative sales and more transactional sales. And I definitely agree with you that the consultative way is way more satisfying when you're the salesperson doing it, because you really feel that you're helping the other guy. 100%.
But I don't think there isn't I think as the internet and as people are more educated as well, and I think it's a fascinating point, because people's understanding of technology has rapidly increased. And I think people understand much more about how to adopt the technology and how to use it, which I think the role of the salesperson in the sale has evolved as well, from maybe more educational to more curation. And I think that's quite an interesting evolution as well. So although sales are becoming more transactional in places, there's still an important role for the salesperson within that, even in the more transactional sale.
Amazing. Do you think that tech will disrupt sales in the sense that a salesperson would have less of a role in terms of doing discovery calls and just having a human being on the other side of the table or the phone?
I think that it already has disrupted the salesperson. I don't think it will replace them yet. I think most people that you speak to who are the experts in AI and natural language processing, are we going to get to this stage in sales where the sales guy is replaced by a robot or by AI? I'm not convinced that's going to be in the foreseeable decade or two. And I think there will always be a role for the salesperson because of the art element. But I think the science element of sales, in terms of how much we can measure, how efficient we can get, the various elements of the sale that can be augmented is definitely something which is being advanced. And there's a whole suite and range of technologies that can help with that as well. But I still see the place for the salesperson.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Gong is one example. Gong and Chorus and all these tools that help basically augment your work with tech and just makes it.
But I think any work is being augmented as well. You take the automation of Google Calendar, you take the automations and the tools that we use today that are making us more efficient. Those are all there in terms of capturing and expanding our ability to remember things and action things and automate. And I think this is just a further extension of that, specific to the sales branch.
Cool. So the concept of this podcast, because the first episode, I have to say it, is talking about fuck-ups. We all have them. I had a few fuck-ups today. I plan to have a few fuck-ups tomorrow as well.
Including all the outtakes from this podcast.
Including that. So in your path to become a CRO and through that path you were VP sales several times, do you have an interesting fuck-up story to tell us about some time where you basically fucked up?
So it happens on a regular basis, but I think I want to take us back to my first role as a VP sales. And I think that transition from being a team lead or even a sales guy into sales management is a super tricky transition, which has a lot of room for error and a lot of room for mistakes. And I think it was one of my big mistakes, which I think goes back to my core, and I've tried to learn from, which I think is worth sharing and talking about. But in essence, the role I took was a role at a company called Avis, which recently sold out to ServiceNow. And I transitioned from my role as a team lead and a director at ClickTel, which is now Content Square, another Israeli unicorn. I don't, unicorns used to be a rare thing, not so much anymore. I joined, it was a 20-man startup at the time, and I was coming in as VP sales. And I think, I definitely don't believe I succeeded in the role. I failed in the role. I was there for over a year, and then I moved on. But I think part of the reason why I failed was my inability to focus on the long term. I was very much focused on the short-term goals. And as sales guys, we're kind of trained, we talked right at the beginning about the coin-operated sales guys and the focus on revenue. And I think that was a big transition that I had to make, whereby I was still looking at things of getting a deal done, closing the deal, hitting my number for the quarter. And the numbers were still good and I was still hitting numbers. Yet I didn't necessarily have the formulas and the process and the playbooks correct. And I was working for two founders who were developers by nature, and their background was developers. And as developers, I think you spend a lot of time looking at the formula, you spend a lot of time looking at the scripts, and then the result comes out at the end of the code because you've done everything correct. And in sales, you don't get as clean attribution as that. You don't get as clean line that you do X, Y, and Z, and the result is, whatever you want it to be. And for us, for me in that role, there was a real challenge in terms of making sure that I had the processes correct and the results. And I was kind of looking at it and saying, well, the results are good here. The results are okay. And they were saying, yeah, but your process is a mess. You haven't built things correctly yet. And when you look at it on the long term, you want to make sure that even though the ARR is going up or the MRR, the numbers, the revenues are going up, that the right strategy is in place. And then you have the flip side. If you spend too much time looking at the strategy without the results, it's also not necessarily the right thing. So you have to get the balance between the two right. And as a sales guy, I'm one of those sales guys or sales leaders that was like, all of this process stuff is a lot of bullshit, right? It's a lot of like BS, and I can, put 50 flowcharts in place for you, but ultimately, I want to see that the numbers are right at the end of the day. And for me, it was about learning how to balance the two. And I started to realize as I grew into that VP sales role that you have to get the balance correctly. You have to look at the metrics, but you also need to make sure that the process is there and that you're building a plan that's actionable and that you can deliver on. So I think my real fuck up in this as an inexperienced VP was to be patient enough and mature enough to wait for the attribution and to wait for the results, and to believe in the strategy and the process that I was putting in place, and not just look at the final result and go, leave me alone because everything is working,
That's really interesting. I think you touched on really a few great points. First of all, becoming a VP or an executive or growing into management from an individual contributor, which is something that bothers a lot of people. There's this thing, what it's called, the Peter principle, where people usually in organizations, I don't know if you heard about it, people in organization usually get promoted up until the role where they really fuck up in that role. Until they become very bad at their job because they were great as a salesperson that closed a lot of deals, but they're horrible at managing a team of 100 people. But they'll be promoted because they were great salespeople. And then all the large organizations in the world they have this thing where middle management and sometimes management includes a lot of people that should have stayed as individual contributors. So do you have any tip of how somebody could, first of all, understand that it's right for them to become a VP, to become a manager of a sales team? How does one get to that realization?
So I think there's two aspects to the question. One is in terms of pure skills, right? So what skills do you need in order to move into sales management from being an individual contributor? And the other one is what mindset do you need? And I think those are two very different questions to me. From a skills standpoint, I think as you move into management, you're going to end up having to focus. You need the basic credibility to be able to support your team from an escalation standpoint. So getting the deals done, advising them how to get the deals done, all of the bits that made you so good at your job, those raw skills should be there in terms of moving into management. The other aspects you're going to end up focusing on, as we all know in management, is hiring, coaching, retaining, and understanding process and strategy and executing on those. I think the bigger aspect for me and where my fuck up really came from wasn't those. I genuinely, I had good leadership experience. I was already a team lead. I was already a manager to a certain extent. I think for me, it was a mindset change. And the mindset change for me is I think threefold. It's number one, moving away, especially as a salesperson. I think this is a very hard thing to do because we're commission driven very often. So we look at it on a short-term revenue goal and we look at it to say, what's going to get me to my short-term goals and bring me more money? And it's shifting from you and your team to the business. And all of your goals should be aligned to the business and focusing on growing good revenue for the business for long term. And that goes into the coaching and the mentoring and everything else that you're going to do in terms of driving that business. So I think that maturity aspect, and I think it goes even further, salespeople are generally somewhat egotistical. It's a stereotype, but it's there. And I think for me, there was a big aspect to turn around and go, it was very easy for me to kind of blame them and go, look, my numbers speak for themselves. Like, everything's good, like, go away. And it was for me to turn around and go, this isn't just their mistake. This is my mistake as well. There's a frustration here on both sides, and I need to take some aspect of responsibility and accountability for that.
Awesome. I think that's extremely hard. First of all, when you're measured on your performance, I mean, sales is one of the, well, it's not the only, but it's one of the only teams in startups and in high tech that their compensation is, half of it is based on their performance. I mean, it's not like that for developers. It's not like that for the vast majority of marketing people or the vast majority of CS people. There are some organizations here in Israel that don't do commissions. They have very large. We can
name them.
Okay, it's Monday, but basically there's.
I don't think it's a secret that Monday.com haven't historically paid commission. I do understand they've started to bring in bonus structures, and bonus structures are working. I think it's a fascinating debate that's going on right now in sales in terms of paying commission or not paying commission. I don't think the aspect is only over commission anyway. There's a competitive element to sales. And by the way, I know some of the sales leaders at Monday as well. They still primarily look for a very competitive nature in their sales guys. And I think that anyone working in tech in Israel to a certain extent is somewhat competitive. If you're not, you generally tend towards the more corporate realm in Israeli society. You know, startups by definition are demanding and demand a certain tempo where you want someone that has some element of drive and competitive nature within them, even if that's competing with yourself. And that, I think, still lends itself to some of these mistakes. Yeah,
definitely. But it does create that short-term focus for some people. I mean, some people can get over it at some point, but it definitely gets people to think very short-term.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah,
it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think, there's an element within that whereby you have to battle every day on it, but you also have to make sure that you're looking at the attribution, you're waiting for the time to kick in to see the results of the work that you've put in. And I think, by the way, one of the things that's really interesting as you scale up a company is when a company is very small and agile, which very often these sort of position changes happen when someone's been in a startup that grows very quickly and you're the best individual contributor, and then you automatically progress into management. And by the way, I completely get, you asked at the beginning, when is the right time to know that you should make that jump into management? If you don't, you get left behind. And there are a lot of companies that try and say, no, we're going to give you a board seat as an individual contributor. Or we understand you don't like management, but ultimately you're going to start trailing off. So I think it's very, very hard to keep that culture where someone who is an individual contributor is still defining and got that seat at the table, because the seat at the table is talking about strategy. And the other key when you're talking about strategy, and as the ship gets bigger, when you're in a small startup, you're in a speedboat. When you're in a speedboat, you move the wheel, the speedboat moves really fast. The bigger the boat gets, you move the wheel, it takes a lot longer to see the impact of the turn. So every time you change strategy or you bring in a new process or you start refining those processes, it's going to take longer to see the impact. And that creates a frustration unless you already start aligning your head to look at it and measure the things on the way, that at least you're going in the right direction that you want to be.
Definitely. And I share that feeling, because when I started Storemaven in the sales team, then I moved to marketing. I escaped sales to what I thought was the commerce department, but it's hectic. And in marketing, you basically do things that take sometimes years to materialize and to pay off. And I definitely see that it's really, really hard to wait for that attribution, especially when you're in sales, because you need to show the number this month, this quarter. Yeah.
And the other challenge on that is knowing when to pull the plug. It's knowing when to go, this isn't working, and not just live in the hope that the attribution will come at some point.
So let's take this into your path in AppSy. When did you start telling to yourself, okay, this is not working?
It's a great question. I mean, the number one thing for me was when I got a phenomenal offer to go and join SimilarWeb. And for me, it was a case of, the offer was too good to refuse. And I knew it was the right time to go and join another company. But I think it's a really difficult question to know. But I think it's, for me, when there's no one helping you get out of this rut. I've had even days in the office where, especially in sales, where nothing's going right? This deal's going wrong, this person's pissy. It's time. And there are some days where you're just like, you know what? Shut the laptop, go home, write it off. It's a bad day, get a decent night's sleep and start again in the morning. I think for me in a job, it's obviously a lot harder to walk away from a job, but I think in a job, it's when you don't feel that you have the support to help you out of that fuck up, right? If the fuck up's there and you're not finding a way out of it, and you can't build yourself out of it because there isn't a joint willingness to grow and support each other and figure out the problem, and it's either being left to one or the other, or you don't feel, it may not be the other people's fault, it might be your fault, but you don't feel that you can work with them and you don't feel there's a path towards progress. To me, you're not going to grow and you're not going to adapt. And I think that is probably the right time to walk away and find somewhere that you can get the support. Now, by the way, it may be just saying, I need external help to get out of this. And if they're willing to help you find that external help, even if it's not an ability to work together, that might be a path towards it. But if it's with anything, first you have to recognize there's a problem, but then you have to work together to find the path out of it.
So you talked about ego. So when you recognize there's a problem, how do you know that it's them or you?
I think that's part, that is the ego piece is a difficult one to overcome. But I think that's part of working with people that you respect, and if that respect is gone, it's difficult. Ultimately, trust, we have to open up. I don't think all work relationships need to be at that sort of level, but I think we need to be in a situation whereby we're growing. And I think that's what most people are looking for in terms of a level of psychological safety that they want at the office and in the workplace, that allows them to go forward. And I think we're seeing a huge change and transition that's happening in Israeli tech now, where, yes, you can have every happy hour you can possibly dream of and all the ping pong tables and all the PS5s and everything else. But actually people are looking for environments where they can thrive, and they're looking for management that they can grow with. And I think that's going to be a much bigger transition that we see in the market today, where, and I think that's a really important ingredient for us as a startup or scale up nation, that we need more management that knows how to grow people, and we need more openness to work with teams that we can build trust with.
Awesome. Yeah. I think it's a huge ingredient in going over fuck-ups, just having that safety to go to your manager and say, hey, I'm struggling, help, I need help, which is something I think about the generation of our parents. And I can't imagine my dad ever went to his manager and said, I'm struggling. He just shut the fuck up and
get on with it
with his 3 jobs every day. Yeah, it's really, I'm really happy that Storemaven is such a place where here, and I hope I managed to give that feeling to my team. People can.
It's okay to make mistakes. Yeah. And I think that's it's a big one. You don't want to make too many mistakes, but it's okay.
Of course. Make mistakes. Yeah. At the end of the day, we're a business, but still having that safety is really assuring. So, just last question on that. I mean, you had. Did you have some self-doubt? I know as a salesperson, once you're starting to get into this place of self-doubt, maybe I'm the problem. You start getting in this spiral of doom, as I call it, if you don't treat it or process it right. Did you feel self-doubt in that period?
I think everyone has an element of self-doubt, even the most egotistical people, and my siblings will tell you how egotistical I am. I think there's always going to be self-doubt. I think the challenge for salespeople with self-doubt is the numbers, because we live and die by the numbers. The numbers were good. And the challenge that you have more and more in today's sales world, as we talked about at the beginning, where there's this big, broader, curation of information, and there's a lot of offline, and product-led growth is becoming a big area, etc. There's more and more reason for the rest of the business to turn around and go, you weren't the key factor in getting this deal over the line. In the old days at Oracle, we felt the sales guy was the key factor. Now, Oracle will argue it was the product, but whatever, it didn't matter. It was a very sales-driven culture. There are less sales-driven cultures out there. And for me, it was a case of saying, well, look at the numbers. My numbers are going up. My numbers speak for themselves. And that allows you to go on the ego, right? If the numbers aren't there, there's a ton of self-doubt that kicks in, which can sometimes be self-fulfilling. And as sales guys, we need to get ourselves out of the rut and make sure that we realize, well, actually, it's marketing and we can try and find and blame everyone else but ourselves.
Blame marketing.
But I think there is, there's an element to balance that today, whereby you can't take all of the credit, nor can you take all of the blame. And you have to find the balance.
All right. Thanks, Avi. This was amazing. I'm sure it benefited a lot of salespeople that tuned in and want to grow in their careers here in Israel. Our time is running. We're running out of time. And I just have a few more questions for you before we sign off. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So these are all quick fire. Just give me the first answer that pops in your head. Who in the Israeli high-tech scene would you most like to take for lunch?
Shimon Peres. I know not necessarily in the high-tech scene, but I think he was like the ultimate dreamer, the ultimate kind of bootstrapper and visionary. And I'd love to pick his brain about how we progress the high-tech scene here.
Awesome. If you could work in any other company, in any other role in the Israeli tech scene, what would it be?
Not strictly a company or the tech scene, but I think I would go for like Minister of Education. I think it's where I could have the biggest impact into the Israeli economy and high-tech scene.
What would you like to be when you grow up?
I don't ever want to grow up.
How do you explain to your kids what you do?
I generally don't. I just play FIFA with them. It's easier.
What does Avi do that people will say around you, this is so Avi?
Completely misspelled and incoherent WhatsApp messages.
I can admit that this is correct. What's your secret?
I think my secret is willing to learn. Like, I read a lot. Like, I'm still buying sales books. I'll buy like a sales book every month, every 2 months. I'm buying more and more books, and I try and read them. I don't have enough time to read them. I still like physical books, and I think it's because I'm willing to admit I don't know everything, and I think things are changing in the sales scene and the tech scene a lot. So I try and learn and read and admit I don't know everything.
Got it. And last question, which famous character is your alter ego?
Famous character. I mean, I'm going to go with Dumbledore from Harry Potter, just because it's what I'm reading with my kids at the moment. But I love Dumbledore. I think Dumbledore is he's the ultimate teacher. And I have like an analogy on it, but Dumbledore, there's a scene in the book, there's 2 great scenes in the books, which I think articulate Dumbledore. It's not a quick fire answer though. He looks into the mirror of Erised, which shows you your deepest desire in the first book. And Harry asked him what he saw when he looked in the mirror, and he said he saw himself with a nice fluffy pair of socks, because alas, another Christmas has passed and people only give him books. And I think it's a really deep understanding of Dumbledore's core, which is people view him as quite a stale educator and someone that only likes books, when actually all he wants to be seen is warm and comfy, a nice pair of socks by the fire. And I think that was the essence of Dumbledore. He wanted to educate through warmth and coziness. And I think only once people feel comfortable, the same with sales, right? So the core of sales is you want people to feel comfortable. You have to build that relationship, and then you can work together to educate and work together and find ways of working together once you've built that trust. And I think Dumbledore understood that trust only came from a relationship and a human comfort and connection first.
Wow, that's an amazing answer. It's probably the best we ever had in the podcast.
It's also the first.
It's also the first, but I'll update you if it's still the best.
Excellent.
But amazing. So thank you, Avi. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure, thank you.
And that's it. ביי ביי.
עד כאן סטארט-אפ פאק-אפס להפעם. כדי לדעת יותר על Storemaven, מה אנחנו עושים ואיך אנחנו עושים את זה, אתם מוזמנים לבקר בסtoremaven.com. עוד פרקים של סטארט-אפ פאק-אפס זמינים באפל פודקאסט, ספוטיפיי, או איפה שאתם לא מוצאים את הפודקאסטים שלכם. תדאגו להירשם ולא תפספסו אף פרק חדש. בשם כל הצוות של Storemaven, תודה רבה על ההאזנה.